Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.4.3 Demon Hunter build guide that uses the new Demon Hunter item coming in Season 9, the Hellcat Waistguard. I spoke about this build briefly in the video in which we went over the new builds coming in Season 9, but today we're going to take a more in-depth look. As always, note that this was recorded on the test server, where things are still subject to change. However, I doubt we'll see any nerfs to this build. In fact, if anything, we might see a small buff. This build has cleared Greater Rifts in the 90s, and is by no means overpowered. It'll crush T13, and it'll let you clear a Greater Rift 75 solo to get your stash tab with little difficulty. This is an Unhallowed Essence build, but it differs significantly from the traditional multi-shot Unhallowed Essence build in that it revolves around a generator, grenades, which is buffed by the Hellcat Waistguard. Let's dive into the skills and items that you need for this build, but we'll start by specifying, wherever you can, try to squeeze a secondary resistance onto your gear. But only do this if it does not interfere with the other attributes we're going to outline below, which should be priority. So first off, you need the 6-piece set bonus of the Unhallowed Essence set. Ideally, you'll do this with 5 pieces of the set plus a Ring of Royal Grandeur in your cube. This build will not work without the 6-piece set bonus. We'll also note that you want to aim for a total of 37%, it's actually 36 point something, percent cooldown reduction in order to maintain 100% uptime on Vengeance. In this guide, we'll outline a gearing path towards that 37% cooldown reduction, but depending on what gear you find, and what gets rolled, you can stray from our recommendations. Just aim for a total of 37% cooldown reduction on your character sheet. Note that you cannot just add up the cooldown in your head. It does not add up that way. 10% cooldown plus 10% cooldown plus 8% cooldown is not 28% cooldown. It's going to come out to much less than that. If you're curious on the exact math, we fully explain that in a very old video of ours, but basically just check your character sheet for that exact number. So your shoulders will have to be Unhallowed Essence. Ideal stats, dexterity, vitality, all resist, and area damage. For your helm, has to be Unhallowed. Dex, vitality, crit chance, and a socket with a diamond. For your amulet, we'll want to go with a Traveler's Pledge. The traditional Unhallowed Essence build goes with a Hellfire, along with Focus and Restraint. But since we're only using a generator in this build and not using a spender, we're opting for the Endless Walk set, the Compass Rose and the Traveler's Pledge, instead of Focus and Restraint. Focus and Restraint gives you a huge damage buff, but Endless Walk still gives a sizable damage buff, along with a toughness buff. It's the more defensive option. Ideal stats, fire damage, crit chance, crit damage. For our gloves, we need Unhallowed Essence. Ideal stats, dex, crit chance, crit damage, area damage. For our chest, we want Unhallowed Essence. Ideal stats, dex, vitality, all resist, and extremely important, the secondary property, max discipline. Remember, our 6-piece bonus for Unhallowed Essence makes us deal more damage for every point of discipline that we have. For the gems in our sockets, we can go with either diamonds for more toughness for the higher Greater Rifts, or dex for more damage. For our wrists, we'll want the Wraps of Clarity. While not mandatory for this build, their secondary property will give us basically constant damage reduction. This will help us survive the higher Greater Rifts, but for speed farming, you can go with Nemesis Bracers or even Warzekian Arm Guards. For your belt, you need the Hellcat Waistguard. Ideally, you'll want to wear it, but you can cube it if you have to. The other belt you'll need for this build, or you'll want rather, again, it's not mandatory, but it really helps, is Hunter's Wrath. This buffs your primary skills. The thing is, Hunter's Wrath's legendary property rolls on a range. So unless you roll max stats on that Hunter's Wrath, it's better to cube the Hunter's Wrath and equip your Hellcat, unless your Hellcat is really terrible and your Hunter's Wrath is really good. Ideal stats, dex, vitality, life percent, and grenades damage. For your rings, you'll want to equip a Compass Rose to complete your Endless Walk set. There's no point getting the ring without the amulet or the amulet without the ring. Ideal stats, dex, crit damage, crit chance, area damage, socket. For your other ring, you'll want a Convention of Elements, and in your cube, a Ring of Royal Grandeur. If you have a really poorly rolled Convention and a really well-rolled Ring of Royal Grandeur, god, that's a lot of R sounds, you can equip the Ring of Royal Grandeur and cube the Convention of Elements, but this is a highly unlikely scenario. While you technically don't need either of these rings to complete the basic version of this build, having them will allow you to increase your damage significantly. And we'll explain why once we get to our pants. which will be right now. You ideally want Depth Diggers. Normally, in an Unhallowed Essence build, you would have the full 6 pieces, so you'd have the Unhallowed Pants, but this is why we're getting our Ring of Royal Grandeur. Depth Diggers buffs primary skills, so this gives us a nice, sizable damage buff. Ideal stats, Dex, Vitality, Grenades damage. For our boots, Unhallowed Essence, Dex, Vitality, all resist and move speed. For our weapons, we need a Dawn in order to maintain 100% uptime on Vengeance. Ideally, you want to be equipping your Dawn, but if your Dawn is super garbage and you have a much better one-handed crossbow to replace it with, you could cube your Dawn. In your other hand, you'll want another one-handed crossbow, and the Fortress Ballista is a solid choice here. Given how fast we attack, we'll basically have that absorb shield up constantly. Alternative but suboptimal choices to the Dawn or Fortress Ballista would be a Balefire Caster, which gives you up to 20% increased fire damage, and a Calamity, which applies Marked for Death, but that really just ends up in a very small damage buff, and we'll explain why later. Only go for these choices if you have really well-rolled Ancient ones, and your Dawn or Fortress Ballista are garbage. Again though, if you're not equipping a Dawn, you need to have it cubed. Otherwise, your cubed weapon will be a Bariza. This lets you get more work out of your grenades by letting them pierce and hit more enemies. Now, we're choosing to dual wield one-handed crossbows for a couple of reasons. First off, we want a fast attacking weapon, because running out of resource is not an issue. Normally, in a resource-intensive build, you want to go for the slowest, hardest hitting weapon, because you want to make the most out of every bit of resource you have. In this case, that's not a problem, so you want to attack as fast as possible. Because of this, a slower two-handed bow or an even slower two-handed crossbow is suboptimal. Second, we're not getting a quiver in our other hand, because we want to stack another 130% crit damage, which of course you'd get from a socketed emerald in your crossbow. Also, there's no quivers that really give a bonus that super benefits this build. If you don't have a well-rolled second one-handed crossbow, and you have a really well-rolled Holy Point shot quiver with fire damage, and crit chance, and attack speed, then you can opt for that. But just remember, dual wielding automatically gives you a 15% attack speed buff. So while quivers can give up to 20% increased attack speed, factoring in that dual wielding gives you 15 automatically, it's not that significant. However, you also need to take into consideration that while you're spamming your grenades, your shots will alternate between your main and offhand weapon. Basically, this means that your damage is averaged between the two weapons. In other words, if one crossbow deals significantly less damage than the other, then you're actually lowering your damage output by equipping that second crossbow, and you're probably better off going with a really well-rolled quiver. Ideal stats on your crossbows: Dex, cooldown reduction, area damage, and most importantly, max discipline on both. For our legendary gems, we want Bane of the Trap because it's the best gem in the game. We want Simplicity Strength, which buffs our primary attacks. And we'll want either Bane of the Stricken or Bane of the Powerful, depending on the content you're running. I normally advocate for Bane of the Powerful over Bane of the Stricken for all but the highest Greater Rift pushing. However, in this build, because we're spamming grenades so fast, you build up your Stricken stacks a lot faster, so it's worth considering in a lot more circumstances. Still, for speed farming, Bane of the Powerful is the better choice. For our Paragon Points, we'll want to max out move speed, then dump everything into Dex. Offense, you'll want cooldown reduction, then crit chance and crit damage and attack speed. For defense, all resist, life percent, and armor. And utility, area damage, life on hit, resource cost reduction. For our skills, we start with our bread and butter: grenades, cluster grenades. The Tinkerer rune here is useless since we don't need to generate hatred. The stun grenade is an inferior choice due to the state of monster crowd control resistance. Cold grenade may seem inviting, and maybe some more experimentation needs to be done, but overall it looks like its damage potential is less than our 2 remaining runes. Cluster grenades and grenade cache. Grenade cache shoots out 3 grenades for 160% damage each, whereas cluster grenades shoots out 1 grenade that deals 200% damage in a 9-yard radius. The Hellcat Waistguard gives your grenades a chance to bounce 5 additional times, and with the way they bounce, it's easier to aim. It's easier to target the areas you want to target with Cluster Grenade than with Grenade Cache, which just kind of spams your entire screen, so Cluster Grenade seems to edge out Grenade Cache because of this. Next, we need Preparation Invigoration. 20 more discipline translates into more damage thanks to our Unhallowed Essence bonus. Also, we want to try to keep our discipline topped off as much as possible, because as it goes down, so does our damage. Next, we want Vault Tumble to keep away from our enemies. The 4-piece set bonus of Unhallowed lets us deal more damage and gain damage reduction if no enemies are close to us, and we want to keep this buff up at all times. That said, you do have a grace period during which you can be close to enemies, and you'll often need to do that to gain the maximum damage potential. Next, we'll take Fan of Knives Bladed Armor. This is a purely defensive buff and is not needed for speed farming. If you don't need the extra toughness, you can opt for Companion, Wolf Companion. Next, we'll want Marked for Death, Death Toll. Combined with our high attack speed, the Death Toll rune lets us pop Marked for Death on a high health target and then regain health really quickly. The damage bonus from Marked for Death is not great. Yes, it says 15%, but that is 15% additive, not multiplicative. Basically, for the same reason that 10 plus 10 plus 8% cooldown reduction is not 28, but less than that, 15% damage, or the 15% damage from Marked for Death, when combined with some other buffs you're getting, actually works out to less than that. So we're mostly taking this skill for the life leech. If you don't need that extra sustain, you can opt for something like Caltrops Bait the Trap for more crit chance. Just remember not to get too spammy with it, because you want to keep your discipline topped off. Then lastly, we need Vengeance Darkheart. Vengeance is incredibly powerful, giving us a 40% damage buff. And the Darkheart rune basically doubles your toughness. If you really don't feel like you need that buff, you can go with Personal Mortar to squeeze out just a bit more damage, but it's probably not worth taking in any realistic scenario. For our passives, we need Grenadier. Grenadier? Grenada? For our passives, we need Grenadier to make our grenades deal more damage in a greater area. We'll take Cull the Weak to boost our damage against the enemies we slow with Fan of Knives and our Bane of the Trapped. We'll take Numbing Traps to basically just flat out reduce all incoming damage by 25%, and Awareness for an extra life. If you feel you don't need those last two, then Ambush deals a great amount of damage, and Tactical Advantage will make your speed farming build faster. And that wraps up this guide. As a reminder, this is on the test server, and while I don't expect any changes to this build, do check back in the future just to make sure. Also, leave your thoughts on this build. Does it look fun? Do you want to play it? Personally, I prefer the multi-shot variant of Unhallowed Essence, but that is because it's one of my favorite builds in the game. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders to keep up to date with Diablo news.